Hi, my name's Bob Clearmountain. I'm here at Apogee, Apogee Electronics and Studios, and we are in our newly created Atmos room, which used to be our green room. Still is the green room, really, for the stage. And it was like a weekend conversion, a mad weekend last weekend. This is a real budget room. These are RCF speakers, and the total for all 12 speakers, including the sub, is under $3,000, which is pretty reasonable. Okay, well, I think it's got to be musical. It's got to not take you away from just like a good stereo mix. There can't be anything in it that distracts you from the narrative of the song, of what the song's about, or the meaning, whatever the artist is trying to get across in the song. And so it's really no different than a stereo mix in that sense. But obviously things are coming out of different speakers, and there are ways to do it that aren't distracting, that are musical, that really work, where you have something appear in another speaker, but it isn't necessarily stepping on something that's happening in the front. Maybe I usually rely on the center speaker quite a bit, which a lot of people don't. A lot of people avoid it because they're used to a phantom center. And I think that's one of the great things about Atmos, which I discovered mixing 5.1, that it puts if you put the singer in the center speaker, it's more like they're in the room with you. And not only that, but it keeps the focus. I'll do a mix and I'll walk around the room. So it can't just sound good from sitting in the so-called sweet spot for me. Maybe for other people, I don't know. And this way, if everything is fairly extreme and not pulled in, whereas a lot of people do things where they'll put the same signal in several speakers to try to pull it into the room. Well, that falls apart when you move. That's fine if you're sitting in the middle. And so that's something for me, is that I like to know where everything is, and I want everything to stay there. I never have. I've heard that other mixers have that they say, oh, the center channel seems weird to me. I've never had that happen. I mean, maybe I'm just lucky, or maybe the artists that I work with think a little differently. I don't know, but they mostly, like I just did a bunch of mixes for Howard Jones, and he's an 80s synth pop guy, and he loved he was like, this is fantastic, and he said, look, don't do whatever you think works in this format. Don't think of it as anything like the stereo mix. Do what you think is right. So he was maybe unusual, but most of all the Brian Ferry stuff and Roxy music, we certainly use center speaker, and they were quite happy with it. And I think once people get used to it, that they like it. I mean, it's there for a reason. It's there. It's designed for movies, basically. The format's really all totally for movies, and it's designed so that the dialogue's coming out of the center, where usually that's where the action is on the screen. Well, why would it be any different with music? You want the focus of the music, which is usually the singer and maybe the snare drum or bass drum or something like that, or whatever solo instrument. It's probably you want it to be in one place, to come out of the center. I don't think it does. I really don't. Because usually always when I do an Atmos mix, I start with a stereo mix. So I get the stereo mix together first before I turn on any of the other speakers. And then once I get a stereo mix that's sounding musical and good, and then I'll start assigning other channels, because I'm doing them both at the same time. I'm doing the stereo mix and the Atmos at the same time. And so then I'll start, and actually while I'm doing the stereo mix, I'm in the back of my head, oh, I bet this will sound good in the right rear or something like that. Usually I'll put a keyboard in the back, or if there's strings and horns, I'll put them in the back. which is sort of works pretty well. But then I'll switch the monitor over, and then I'll refine that where everything is. But usually then musically, it's pretty much the same, and EQ-wise, and the effects get to be different because they're spread out. I have quad reverbs, which for the stereo kind of fold it down to the stereo. Quad reverbs and delays, and I kind of do funny things with delays. That's where it gets really fun for me, is all the effects, and where the effects are separate from the where the original sounds are, you know. Well, there's a Clearmountain domain, which of course I came up with, which is a model of what I do have been doing in the analog world for years, and and I actually use a few different substantiations. I forget that word out. Substantiations of that, and then all the other plugins, the Pultec plugins, and the Mod Comp, and the LA3A plugin. It's called the Opto compressor. I use that a lot, really a lot, because it's very similar to the LA3A hardware compressor that I use quite a bit. I don't know Logic that well, or some of these other DAWs, but I know Pro Tools, you can have a 7-channel aux bus, right? And so you can have your stereo mix just like you would do a stereo mix properly, and then have an aux bus, put all the channels at 0 at unity gain, and then do a separate pan for that. You just have to switch your monitor over to that, which you could do if you have one of these really easily, Symphony IO, and then do your panning there, and then your mix is basically the same. All the processing is the same, right? It's just that now you have another layer, which is that. Of course, for your overhead mics, you'd set up another like a quad bus or something like that for that, and so you can do it the same way, or you could do it the opposite way, where your main bus is your Atmos bus, and then set up a stereo aux for your stereo mix, which is really basically getting the same thing. It's just the only thing that's different is the panning, and so it's even simpler in Pro Tools than it is the way I'm doing it. Sure. Which surprises me that nobody does it. Yeah, well, basically, because I'm mixing both at the same time, the stereo mix is going through the bus compressor, right? And what I've done is I've taken the DC voltage from that and gone into an array of other VCAs. It's the same VCA that's in the compressor, basically, so it sounds the same. And luckily, the G series comes with 8 extra VCAs. They're linked to extra faders, but then once you do this mod, then those faders don't do anything. They just become soft groups if you want to use them. So basically, this is slaving off of that for the 5.1 mix. For the Atmos mix, I found another rack of those stereo VCA cards. So I had 8 more. And so I linked, well, the guys here at Apogee actually, they linked them all together, and they also figured out a way so I could compress less on the sides, the rears, or the overhead. Because for doing live tracks, like for studio stuff, it's not important, but for live stuff, you usually have the audience coming out around you, and if you're hitting the main compressor really hard, they tend to sound like they're kind of fluttering a little bit, you know. But basically, that's how it works. It's pretty simple. I would imagine you could do the same thing with sidechaining compressors. And there's getting to be some plugins, some multi-channel compression plugins that you can get. There's some companies that are doing them now. And I've done it with the Apogee Mod Comp, where you just put it right across the bed, the 7.1 bed, and it just does the whole thing, and then you just have to compress the overhead separately. But that actually works pretty well, because I've done some in-the-box mixes, and it sounded pretty good, you know. Well, first if it's something that's been mixed before, whether I did it or somebody else did it, I'll do my best to duplicate the mix in stereo or get as close as I can get. Sometimes I end up trying to make it a little better, but if I can, sometimes I can't. But then I'll once I get that happening, I'll start trying to think of, okay, how can I put things in different places and have it work, And I tend to keep the drums and most of the vocals in the front, and if it's a rock song, I keep the power chords in the front, and I'll maybe put the acoustic guitars in the sides. I'll just try different things. A lot of times it's just a matter of trial and error, like what works, And I'll try something in the back and I go, oh no, that's really annoying, and I won't do that. And a lot of times I'm moving stuff around, and I right down to just before I print the mix, I'll go, wait a minute, no, that's really irritating. Let me swap that with something else and just move things around, Yeah. But the basis, that's how it, and the Atmos mix, like how I said, I tend to walk around the room before I print it, or I'll sit in the back, on the back couch, because I just want it to sound, it should sound good. It's funny because Rhett Davis would stand over there between the right front and right side speaker. He would listen from there because he felt he got a really good perspective of the overall mix, which is a fascinating thing, isn't it? Yeah, well, I have a limited number of buses on the console, so I basically have 16 that I can use, and so I use the bed quite heavily, and then I'll have two extra buses that I'll use for, or sometimes more, depending on if I really want to play around. But I can have up to 4 extra buses for moving objects. So, and I know a lot of people create their bed out of objects, and I'm sure there's some reason for that nobody's been able to convincingly explain to me. Doesn't really make sense to me. It seems like the bed is designed for music, and so why not just use it for the music? And even with that, I can pan something between speakers. I have it set up on my routing and my SSL, so I can pan something between any pair of speakers that are next to each other, and so I don't see any advantage to making the bed out of the objects. And then I'll have a couple of objects, and I'll print them separately. And I have a separate print rig, so I have a multi-track rig and a separate print rig. So all the Dolby stuff is in the print rig. So I'll print them separately, and then once I'm done with the mix, I'll go through and I'll pan those objects if they need to where they need to be panned to. And but not that much. A lot of the stuff I do, it's all pretty static. The 4 speakers in the ceiling are, there's 4 static objects that I use for the overhead speakers. So there's usually a total of either 4, 6, or 8, somewhere around there. And, but that's about it. I don't go past that 8 objects. And those I'll usually have a quad ambience of some sort, which is normally the Apogee Studio. We have a quad impulse response to the Apogee Studio that is up there quite often. And then sometimes I'll put keyboards up there, synthesizers, things like that. Delays, I'll put a little slap maybe in the rear overhead speakers, and do a lot of things with little short slaps and stuff like that just to create an ambience. Yeah, usually bass drum and snare drum, bass, and they'll also be, I do like a divergence, so they'll also be in the left and right front, like down about 15 dB or 10 to 15 dB, something like that. And so it's not all, it's focused on the center, but not totally center. And other things, if there's a guitar solo comes up, maybe that'll be in there. Or if the singer, like with Springsteen, if he's playing guitar, I'll put his guitar with him with his voice, or something like that. There's been some things where it'll start out with just an acoustic guitar and vocal, and they'll both be in the center. So it's really, you can do amazing contrast where a song will start with just somebody playing acoustic guitar and singing, and then it'll get to the chorus and it'll just explode and everything will come in and all around you. And I always love those types of dynamic contrasts, those dynamic lifts where you can actually use the spaciousness of Atmos to enhance that. That's one of the great things about Atmos that you can do. I do that in stereo as well. A lot of delays or a different reverb. Just change the environment slightly. So as if you're going from a small place, and it depends on the narrative of the song. The verse might be some introspective thing, and then there's some revelation that occurs in the chorus. And then that opens up. And you get that a lot in pop music, and it's just a great opportunity to enhance that with effects. And then with Atmos, it's the same thing. You can get things to move. Things can be sort of sequestered in the front, and then it gets to the chorus or the bridge or something. And now all of a sudden there's strings in the back or something like that. I don't think there should be an accepted wisdom. I think that's what makes it kind of fun, is just to hear how different people use the medium and see where they're putting in different places. I enjoy that. I enjoy listening to other people's mixes and go, oh, well, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. That's kind of cool. Or not.
Yeah.
I think they can. They really can. The Huey Lewis stuff is a pretty good example where the stereo mixes, I was quite proud of the sports album that I mixed. And but I found I could do things in Atmos that actually made it a little bit more interesting, and more fun to listen to. And not only that, but the other thing with Atmos, and it's the same with 5.1, because I mixed this Marley's Greatest Hits in both, and although my Atmos mixes aren't available anywhere else yet, hopefully they will be at some point. But it's because that band is so unbelievable, and every musician is incredible, and I'll have like the organ player in the left rear, and then the piano in the right rear or something like that. And then they got this rhythmic thing going on between the two of them. And you can kind of go over and, oh, what's this guy doing? And then go, oh, what's this guy doing? You know what I mean? And you can actually really investigate certain types of music if it was mixed in that way, where the people are in the musicians are in different speakers. But then you sit in the middle and you just feel like you're sitting in the middle of the studio while they were recording it, And you can get different experiences out of it depending on what your perspective that particular day, where you're standing or sitting. Yeah, well, sometimes like sometimes I'll put the sax solo just in the right side speaker, So now all of a sudden, the song's going along, and then it's the sax solo break, and he just appears next to you. It's kind of a visual thing, like you're standing on the stage almost,
right.
And he's not Huey. Huey's there, and no, Johnny's over here now, something like that, or Chris Hayes is now in the left side speaker, something like that, and then the keyboards are in the back, and so you're sort of in the middle of the action. And but there's sort of a reason for it. It isn't just kind of random. It's it kind of works visually. It's always been the same with me even with stereo. I think of it as a stage. It's sort of a play. I think of it very visually. That okay, this thing happens over there. This thing happens over there, and maybe there's a communication between the two instruments of some sort. And. But there's that much more because you have a bunch more speakers and there's more places to let that happen, and you got to be careful with it because it can get out of hand, and especially because Universal decided to have one of their guys mix the Huey Lewis record, and so Heart of Rock and Roll, they went to play that for us, and and so we're listening, and there's this heartbeat at the beginning of the record. I don't know if you remember this. Doo, doo, doo. Well, the heartbeat is bouncing around the room. You know what I mean? And then the organ is just constantly doing this around the room. And John and I looked at each other and said, like, what is this, a joke? What are you guys doing? You know, do you know anything about this band? And I said, look, I'll fix it for you, you know. And so I redid it. Well, this is the thing, and we've had a lot of discussions about this. In fact, I'm doing a panel at NAMM about how I just don't. This is how so much of it's done nowadays, where they just send it to somebody, they hire some mixer, and they call them. They call them Atmos mix farms, you know, and with it, no interaction from the producer or the artist. I just think it's wrong. I think that should be illegal personally, and obviously it's not. You know, they can do anything they want. The labels own the masters, I guess, and so I guess it's their right to do whatever they want. But it's just unethical, I believe. Just my own feeling. Okay, I'm not trying to, you know, I don't know. I always get nervous about saying things like this, but I do think it's unethical. I think they should always get the artist, at least try to get the artist and producer involved. And if they can't, then they shouldn't do it. They should just leave it at stereo. If the artist and the producer says, "Oh, do what you want. That's fine. We trust you." Then okay, great. That's fine. You know, but they should at least be somehow involved, because that. You know, a lot, like you say, a lot of creative decisions go into the mix on these records. You know, people will spend, you know, weeks mixing their album or more. Sometimes, you know, I won't mention his name, but I know one producer that spent a year mixing an album. Of course, it sold 15 million copies, I think, but still, you know, it's a real creative thing that happens, and it shouldn't just be given to some kid that from a different era that doesn't know anything about that music, and that's only getting paid like $300 or whatever it is, you know, whatever they pay them. That's not right. It's just wrong. It's just something that I don't know, maybe you just have to have an instinct about it. I mean, it's not that much different than stereo, because you can do the same problem in stereo. You know, it's just, and that's where the artist should be there, you know, to hear it. If the artist is distracted and is losing the connection with the narrative, then there's something wrong. And a good mixer will know. We'll say, okay, this isn't right. I've gone down the wrong street here, and we'll cut back until the song survives. You know what I mean? And that's what it is. It's really just knowing how to mix, I think, and just being in touch with the music and being sensitive to what the music is. And this is my worry, is that there's a lot of people out there that maybe if they had enough time, maybe they could come up with a good mix. But I don't think they're even given that much. You know, people have to put food on the table. So, you know, they're going to try to do as many mixes as they can. They're probably getting paid by the mix. And so, you know, they're trying to run through it as quick as possible. Like, you know, it's just not right. I don't know. Yeah, it really is. Some people can do that, and some people are not so good at it. Yeah. You know, and it's always been that way. It's no different with Atmos.